We just finished wiring up everything on the Redux side of our application, or at least the initial boilerplate anyways. At this point, we have a single reducer called the auth reducer, and we have said that the auth reducer is really just responsible for deciding whether or not a user is currently logged in. So why do we really care about that though? Like, obviously there's an obvious answer here. We only want the user to be able to use our application if they're logged in, but really specifically thinking about our application, what aspects of it are going to change when a user is or is not logged in. Once we understand this a little bit better, once we understand what the impact of having a user logged in or logged out is, I think we'll have a better time, or an easier time at least, deciding what next area we need to work on inside of our application. So let's go back to our mockup and look at some of the different aspects of this thing. So again, the very easiest, the first thing that I really see to my eye that really cares about whether or not a user is logged in is the content inside of our header. And so really, it says login sign up right here. Really, we essentially want to show something that says like login with Google or something like that, or sign in with Google on the header up here if a user is not logged in. Once a user does sign in with Google, however, once we know that they are in fact logged in, then that header is supposed to just kind of magically change. I no longer want to show that sign in with Google button up here on the top right. Instead, I want to show like a logout button and a button to add money to their account, which we will talk about in great detail later on. And these credits thing, which again we'll talk about in great detail later on. So at first glance, I think it's very easy, very clear to say that our header component is going to change in some fashion whenever the user is logged in or logged out. There's one other area that we need to be thinking about when a user is or is not signed in, and that is some of the different routes that the user has access to. So here's a diagram of some of the different routes we have inside of our application. So up at the very top, the index.js file, that shows the app component, and then the app component is going to show the header, the landing, the dashboard, and the survey new components. Now, the header is always going to be visible, no matter what. Yes, the content inside of the header is going to change slightly depending on whether or not the user is logged in, but we can confidently say that no matter what, the user should always be able to see the header. Some of the other components, however, are going to just change their behavior slightly depending on whether or not the user is authenticated. So the landing screen, well, you know what? It's okay if someone wants to see our landing screen. If you want to see the landing screen inside of our application, if you want to see the marketing screen, that's totally fine. We will let you see that. However, other things like, say, the dashboard, where a user sees a list of all the surveys that they've created over time, or the form to create a new survey. Those are both things that we don't really want the user to have access to unless they absolutely positively are logged into our application. So I think that it is safe to say that if a user is or is not logged in, we want to have some logic tied to our dashboard and survey new components. And if a user is or is not logged in, we want to have some content, or some logic inside of our header to decide what content to show inside of there. Okay? So with this in mind, I think that absolutely the next step, without a doubt, that we're going to want to accomplish is to make sure that we can start to get some of these different components, which we have not yet created, we still need to do, to be visible on the screen. Once we can actually show them, then we can start thinking about adding in some logic to say, hey, you should or you shouldn't be able to see this thing or this individual component based on whether or not you are logged in. So long story short, we want to have the ability to show different routes or different sets of components on the screen, and then add some logic to toggle whether or not a user can see them. So just thinking about navigation in general, my mind immediately goes to React Router. So I think that in the next section, we should start to wire up React Router inside of our application. Once we set up all these different components, we'll then be able to add in some further logic to decide whether or not a user can see each individual one. Okay? So that's the game plan. We're going to wire up React Router. We're going to get some of these different components visible on the screen. We'll then tackle the header and some of the individual components that depend on the user's authentication state. So let's take care of all this in the next section.